Now, so what this tells us about basketball is that in basketball there's a belief of clutch players, but there's not the reality of clutch players, especially not in percentage improvement. And you know what? If we compare basketball to Wall Street, basketball is actually much more selective. Many more people want to play basketball, and the basketball league is actually quite small compared to the size of investment banking, for example. And to be one of those 17 people who are the clutch players, it's a much more self-selected club. These are people who are much more on the tail than bankers. And basketball is much more mechanical compared to banking, right? If you think about it, what we saw was that bonuses were effective for mechanical tasks and not for mental tasks. Basketball is partially mental, partially mechanical, but banking is just mental. So with all of these, could it be that bankers are only improving with the size of bonuses, that they never get stressed, that they never get those decrease in performance? I don't think so. I'll tell you one last thing. When I go to these bankers one by one, and I say, tell me, what do people do in the office in October, November, and December? They tell me, privately, that they don't do anything but think about their bonus and talk about their bonus. That every day they pop up a spreadsheet on their computer, and they look at their performance, and they calculate their bonus, and they talk to their friends about what it is, and then the next day they do it again and again, and trying to figure out what will be their bonus. So even if they don't admit that this is stressing them out, they certainly admit that this is taking part of their mind share. They certainly admit that part of their thought processes, time, energy, attention, is directed toward these bonuses and away from actually doing their work. So what do we come out for this thinking about bonuses? Of course, we talked about the fact that money is just one of many motivators for human behavior. But even when we talk about money, money doesn't always behave in the way we think it should. When we talked about the psychology of money, about how giving people small amounts of money can sometimes backfire, because it could change something from a social relationship to a financial relationship, from something people do for you as a favor to something they do as a job. That's at the low end. At the high end, we see that bonuses also don't behave in the way that we think they would. Sometimes we can give very high bonuses and people try hard, but this fails because they over-try, they over-strive, and this pressure and tension is actually getting them to perform worse. So when we think about money and bonuses, I think we need to think very carefully. What is this amount of money doing? How is it changing human psychology? How is it changing the mindset? How is it changing the motivation? If we keep on having the view of people as rats in a cage with very simple rules between reward and outcome, bonuses and performance, we're actually going to get things wrong. And we need to truly understand the nuances of human motivation and thinking if we want to use money in the right way to incentivize good behavior and not to get lots of bad behavior. If you think about everything we've talked today, it's really about what are all the things that create motivation at the end of the day. And when we think about motivation, the simplest thing is to think about motivation is all about payment. We pay people, they'll be more motivated. We don't pay enough, they'll be not as motivated. But I hope that what you think about now is that this equation of motivation includes all kinds of other things. It's about meaning and creation and challenge and ownership and identity and pride and all of those things. And you can ask yourself, and how do we tap all of them? If we want to motivate people, sure, we can do it with payment to some degree, but why not tap all of those other elements? Why not think about them as well? And I recently got a call from a big bank. This was a big bank that takes 50% of the yearly profit and distributes them between people who work at the bank as bonuses. And we spent about 2 hours on the phone, and they described to me the 16 equations they use to identify how much each person should pay. And they create an equation for how much money directly they bring and how much they help other people. And there's an equation for this, an equation for that. And there were 16 different equations that determine it. At the end of the day, they distribute a heck of a lot of money to all of these people based on these equations. And after we went all over them and we talked about this, I said, what about other things, right? Why don't you ask somebody who gives a check to somebody for over $5 million to also give them a hug? Or maybe invite them for a glass of beer or have dinner together? I said, how much would that motivate you? I asked the person sitting in front of me, the person who was in charge of compensation, to say, if you invited somebody for beer, how much less you could pay them and still get them to work just as hard? And that person said, but we would never give hugs and we would never give beers and never invite people for dinner. And I said, first of all, why not? And second, I said, I think this is really immoral. You are a public company. You have my money. I'm sure I'm invested in you in some way or another. How dare you not try to learn how to optimize the motivation of people? You're taking 50% of your profits and distributing them to people as bonuses rather than giving them back to shareholders, for example, or investing in the business. Are you doing this in the most efficient way? And the answer, of course, is not. Right? And I think this focusing on people work just for money is really a shame, because I think people don't enjoy their jobs to the same degree. But I think it's also immoral from the perspective of public companies. There is no question that the largest line item for any company are salaries. Why don't we try to figure out what actually motivates people? Why don't we try to figure out how to get people to be happier in their job and work harder instead of just paying the money and thinking that would rule the day? Now, of course, it's good to pay people. You should pay people a decent salary and so on. But if you're a public company, this money is coming from somewhere else, and you should think about where is this money coming from. I will tell you one more story on this. I had a student who told me that he was working in a big bank in New York City, and the year was coming to an end, and he was waiting for his bonus, and his wife was about to give birth. And his boss that year decided not to give him a bonus, or give him a very small bonus actually, but he gave him an apartment in New York City. He was living out of the city and he was commuting every day to the city, and he gave him his own apartment. His boss gave him his apartment that he was not using to use for the year. And this way his wife could give birth in the city. This way he could get home quicker. He would spend more time at home, all kinds of things like that. And the guy said, and it's been quite a few years since, it's maybe been 12 years, and I just met him a few weeks, and he said that it's really amazing because this bonus was really cheap. If you think about the rent per month for the whole year, was much, much less than what you would have made in a bonus. But the gift was thoughtful, and it was useful, and improved his life in a different way, and he couldn't think about his job from that point on in simple monetary terms. Now he had this bond with his boss, he cared about it, he felt this mutuality, and he was not able to think about it just in terms of money. So when we go back and we think about labor, thinking about money is important, but there's all these other things we need to think about. And I think that if we don't, we're actually doing harm, both to the companies and to the employees. The final thought I want to have about this is this question between Adam Smith and Karl Marx, which is the question between efficiency and meaning. So Adam Smith had this very interesting, influential story about the pin factory. And Adam Smith said, imagine somebody who's doing pins. There are 12 steps in a pin. And if somebody has to do step 1, and then step 2, and 3, and 4, and 5, and 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, and then move to the next pin, this is incredibly inefficient. And if you have 12 people, each of them doing one step, this becomes incredibly efficient. And all of a sudden, 12 people can do 100 times more than what each individual could do. And these are economies of scale. These are efficiency. When people specialize and they start doing one specific thing, they can become incredibly good and incredibly fast in this. And because of that, Adam Smith said that we should work like in production lines. Karl Marx, on the other hand, had a very different idea. He said it's all about the meaning of work, that the labor needs to feel connected to its output and its effort and so on. And I actually think that before the Industrial Revolution, they were both correct, of course, but Adam Smith was more correct than Karl Marx. Before the Industrial Revolution, what kind of jobs were there they could find meaning in? If you make a pin, sure, you can find a little bit more meaning, a little less meaning, but the gains of efficiency are so large, and the gains for meaning, I think, relatively speaking, are rather small in that world. However, I think that post the Industrial Revolution, and particularly in the knowledge economy, Karl Marx's ideas are more important than Adam Smith. Think about the current world. The current world is a world in which the potential for finding meaning in our work is tremendous, right? All of a sudden, we're connecting people, we are changing economies. I mean, there's all kinds of things that meaning could get much larger. The meaning of a pin cannot go that much larger. On the other hand, it's much harder to supervise people, much more difficult to find out exactly what people are doing. Right now, in most knowledge work, we trust employees to do the right thing. We can't supervise them and know exactly what they're doing. There's a tremendous agency for people to decide how much to work and how much effort. There's also tremendous value for creativity, ingenuity. And we want people to think about work when they're in the bathroom and on the drive home and when they talk to their friends and so on. So while we have this tension between efficiency and meaning between Adam Smith and Karl Marx, I think the tension is going more and more toward Karl Marx and more toward this idea of finding meaning as an incredibly important part of any job. And we need to figure out how to find meaning and how to search for it and how to help people create meaning, even if it takes time and even if it takes some money, it's going to be a useful thing to do.